Hello, this is Greg Allison from Galactic Greg's coming to you on the 50th anniversary of the ascent of the Intrepid Apollo 12 Lunar Ascent Module from the Moon. The launch of the Intrepid Ascent Module, the Lunar Lander, Lunar Excursion Module, carried Alan Bean and Pete Conrad to the service module to dock up with Richard L. Gordon. And this is the vehicle that took them to the moon to start with, standing here, larger than life, much like Pete Conrad, who I'm doing a tribute to in this video. And you might see this is their mission patch, and their mission, their command module was called the Yankee Clipper. The Intrepid was the lander. I guess I've got to do a little Infinity and Beyond clip at the end. You will see. Watch to the end, my friends, for that little treat if you haven't seen it in my other videos. Pete Conrad was an aeronautical engineer. He was a Navy pilot, a test pilot, aviator, and had a real stellar career, flying 2 Gemini missions, Gemini 5 and Gemini 11. And he was the commander of Apollo 12 and the commander of the Skylab 2 mission, launched on one of these. I'll show you that up close in a minute. Saturn I, Block 2. I'm coming to you now from my wreckage of the DCX rocket. This is one of the things I have in common with Pete Conrad. Why? Because Pete Conrad flew this rocket. And what I have here, under wraps here, is the avionics bay and the intertank section. The other big piece of this are in Alamogordo, New Mexico, at the Space Museum there. And that dome in there, if you can see it, is the first ever aluminum lithium oxidizer tank used by NASA, used by Americans at all. Later they used aluminum lithium oxidizer tanks in the space shuttle to lighten its weight to enable it to reach the high inclinations to launch the ISS, International Space Station, since those were the inclinations used by Russia, and we had a joint program at this time. Of course, all this is right next to Green Greg's barn, log barn, and Green Greg has been using this as a pipe storage place. I'm going to have to call him for that. A little prison here this morning. But once upon a time, I called Jess Spawnable and told him, Jess, hey, I got this. He was one of the program managers here on the Air Force side promoting this project. And he was the Air Force sponsor, that is. And this started out as the single stage rocket technology program. I was one of the guys that helped promote politically to make this thing a reality. And as for such, I'm listed in the SpaceX Hall of Fame, or was. It's the website, at least, is no longer up. That was set up by program manager Bill Gallbatz. In any event, Pete Conrad happened to be in the room when I called Jess Spawnable, and Jess, or just then at the door or something, and Jess said, Pete, come here, guess what this guy's got in his backyard? And Pete got all excited. He was kind of a bigger than life guy, and he was just coming off the walls with excitement. And I asked him, I said, Pete, would you sign the certificates of authenticity for me? Because I was considering taking little pieces of this and selling them as mementos to my space friends, since this thing is the rocket that inspired Jeff Bezos and probably Elon Musk, because this was a reusable rocket that took off and landed vertically and was reused many times. And it was a pioneer in that kind of development, which Elon and Bezos are both pursuing today. And we had hoped that this would be a single stage rocket back then. That was a bridge too far. Mr. Conrad, Pete Conrad, was all excited. And I talked to him at some length, and I said, hey, would you sign these certificates of authenticity? He said, yes, absolutely. He said, but coordinate it through my wife, Nancy, because she handles all this stuff for me. I thought, well, that's cool. I did not get in any great big hurry about it because I had a zillion other things to do. And lo and behold, on the 8th of July, 1999, Pete Conrad had a motorcycle accident and passed away. So that's my Pete Conrad connection. Is this rocket, this wreckage right here. It was the final mission of it. One of the technicians failed to follow the procedures for connected hydraulics for one of the 4 legs that were to deploy, and it did not deploy correctly, and it turned over upon landing. This avionics bay rolled out. There was an F-16 flight computer shelf on the other side of this thing, and this thing, here's where the high pressure helium tanks were mounted that were used in the system. That's one of your stainless steel oxidizer feed lines here. But Pete Conrad flew this thing. He was one of the key guys promoting this thing. He had a console with just 3 people on it to run this rocket. And it had an F-16 flight computer. It was an amazing rocket, amazing technology, and it pioneered a lot of what we're developing today. It pioneered stuff for the space shuttle. It pioneered stuff for rocket technology, reusable rockets, landing rockets, and inspired the likes of Musk, Bezos. So, hats off to Pete. Pete Conrad was born on the 2nd of June of 1930, and unfortunately passed away from internal injuries incurred through a motorcycle accident. He died the 8th of July of 1999. Living larger than life on a motorcycle, dying essentially with his boots on. So Pete Conrad was an amazing individual. And now we're looking into the inside of a Gemini space capsule. Now to give you scale, there's my hand. And here I am against it. As you can see, there's not a lot of room inside this capsule. Now think about this. 2 men squeezed inside this capsule. 2 men. All the space it had is right there. My friends, I got more space than that sitting in my seat in my van. A lot more. Now, it just so happens that Pete Conrad, which also goes by Charles Conrad Jr., and Mr. L. Gordon Cooper Jr., they like the juniors in these missions, I suppose, flew on Gemini 5. And on Gemini 5, they broke the record, the previous endurance record, and stayed 8 days, 8 days cramped in the quarters like this. Can you imagine 2 people, 2 guys, cramped into this for 8 days? I mean, there's the door, there's the windows that could look out to their future Saturn V, ha ha ha, right? So, 8 days, my gosh. And think about this. I mean, you ain't got no room to move. I mean, how do you stretch your legs? Other than taking an EVA, which you had to depress the capsule to do, because you had to open these doors. So EVA was a total depress-repress situation. I mean, to use the bathroom, they had to kind of, I guess, squinch up a little bit and do it in a bag. Or, you know, maybe that cube was for the other stuff down there. So they had tubes that they would take care of their liquid business. And so 8 days, 2 guys in such small quarters, belching, eating, passing gas, and all that nasty stuff. They had to smell god awful in here after 8 days. In fact, that's terrible. Gemini 7 with Frank Borman and Jim Lovell spent 14 days in one of these. 14 days. Can you believe it? Wow, it's nuts. And here's kind of a depiction. You look in here to see what kind of room they had. Hello, Mr. Crewman. Hello, Mr. Crewman. I mean, there's not much room in here. And I think that's looking pretty generous. They got a short doll in there compared. I don't know how the heck I'd squeeze in one of these things. That's tough. I don't believe I can get in here. 8 days, 14 days in one of these. Holy smoke. Now, here's another view of a Gemini. Give you a little different perspective. 8 days in one of these capsules. My friends, I would have a hard time imagining that. So, this is the Gemini simulator here. Now, here's the deal. These also were originally planned to be parafoiled in. Now, Pete Conrad also flew on Gemini 11. And in Gemini 11, he met up with the Agena target vehicle. And they did 2 EVAs. They strapped it at the Agena vehicle, had a strap, and they rotated, and actually had, the first time ever in space, artificial gravity, however slight it was. So just imagine that. And this don't have nearly the switches in it that a space shuttle cockpit does. I've been in one of those. But that's a lot of switches to keep up with. And the Apollo command module was even more. So imagine that, my friends. Pete Conrad, Gemini 5. Pete Conrad, Gemini 12. Spending 8 days originally, then just a couple days in Gemini 11. I said 12, I meant 11. Anyway, cramped quarters for such a long stay. That took some endurance. That took fortitude. That took some real training, my friends. Coming to you from the business end of a Saturn V. Yes, this is the business end. The 5 F1 engines that each produced 1.5 million pounds of thrust. Collectively, 7.5 million pounds of thrust. That's the S1C first stage, S2 second stage is up there, and S4B is beyond that. And to see one standing tall, all you have to do is look right here. And as a tribute to Pete Conrad, who flew on Apollo 12, this is the cutaway of a Saturn V to the thrust structure through the S1C stage to transmit the loads. S1C, S2 stage actually right there. S4B stage. LEM, command module, and put in the last one. This is the S4B stage, which got outfitted to Skylab. And here's what a lunar module actually looked like, a LEM, Lunar Excursion Module. You can see the gold foil on it. This is the kind of vehicle. Now it looks TNC, the real ones were too. They were just basically a balloon, inflated, very thin wall structure to get the weight to its max efficiency. And a ladder like that is what Pete Conrad jumped off and yelled whoopee when he hit the lunar surface. Said, might have been one small step for Neil, that was a big one for me. Paraphrase. But anyway, yeah, I could see that. He had a little jump there. I guess he felt a little better in that Gemini Capsule than maybe Neil would have. So it would have been an advantage to him to have been a little shorter in stature, but he made up for it by being big in life. The Intrepid looked just like this. And so did the Eagle from Apollo 11. And this upper part, that's your ascent module. This is the descent stage here. See the rocket engine from the descent stage? That's all it took to get off the moon. 2 guys and something that size could actually launch from the moon, as opposed to a giant Saturn V rocket. Much easier to get off the moon. To give you an idea, this is all the rocket motor you need to get off the moon. That is the ascent engine for the LEM. Here's our friend, Pete Conrad. And here's the rock he brought back from the moon. Signed by crew member Alan Bean here. So there you are. Apollo 12. See, this is Apollo 12 moon rock. Launched back to us 50 years ago today. This came to us 50 years ago today. And here's your cross-section cut of it. It's kind of basaltic looking, yeah? And this is our Earth version for what a lunar landing module, LEM, would look like, Lunar Excursion Module I should say, on the surface of the moon, as best as we can do in a old crater here in Huntsville, Alabama area. And 50 years ago today, one of these was sitting on the lunar surface, and the Apollo 12 crew blasted off from that. It was called the Intrepid. And here we are looking inside a LEM. I don't know what the crew in Apollo 12 were looking out, or Apollo 11, all the other guys landing on the moon. That's the inside of a LEM, Lunar Excursion Module. Kind of module, the capsule that Pete Conrad went in to the moon. This is actually Apollo 16 command module. So this one actually flew around the moon. This is real lunar hardware right here. And here we are in Apollo capsule trainer here. That's better than a Gemini, but not a lot of room here either. My camper shell, my West Hill was bigger than this by a long shot. The astronauts returned to Earth. They didn't know if there weren't bugs on the moon. We didn't know if we were going to contaminate and kill everybody on planet Earth. So the astronauts needed a facility to be quarantined in until we got confidence that they would be safe. So basically it's just like one of those buses here, a little RV, and they could sit at this table and eat and use tape recorders like that and play Yahtzee, I suppose, or Scrabble, whatever that is. Scrabble. I'm not a game guy myself. And that was their quarters. Very palatial for astronauts, right? But what did they have? No, 6 months. Holy smoke. Crew of 3, 6 months? Interesting. I suppose one of my viewers will comment to that. And 6 seats here. Interesting. Pretty well known, I guess. This is the depiction of your Saturn family of launch vehicles. Here's the original Saturn I Block 1 and Saturn I Block 2. See, they both had the H1 engines, the Saturn V with the F1 engine and the 5 J2s, and one J2 on the S4B stage. And this is the Saturn I rocket. The rocket that carried Pete Conrad, Joseph P. Kerwin, and Paul J. Weitz on the way to the Skylab Space Station on the Skylab II mission. The launch of the Skylab Space Station was done by Saturn V, much like that one right there. The Saturn V that carried the space station up, though, had a larger upper stage on it, as it was not carrying a limb. For the Apollo telescope mount and the docking adapter and all that in the forward area, and the second stage was the Skylab Space Station. And so that's how they got all that up there. On May 25th, 1973, the crew of the Skylab II launched on a rocket very similar to this one. It is 189.9 feet tall. It's a diameter of 21.4 feet. It weighs 1,123,600 pounds. Has a fin span down here of 40.7 feet and a thrust of 1,589,285 pounds. This has the H2 motors at the bottom of it. Yeah, and you can see it's actually made from redstone rockets and the Juno center stage. Very impressive rocket. It was a real workhorse. It was used for some time. It was our last Apollo missions were launched with these, including the Apollo Soyuz test project. And Pete Conrad rode one of those, and he rode one of these. Before all that, he went up in Gemini missions. Skylab II was crewed by Pete Conrad as the commander, Joseph B. Kerwin, and Paul J. Weitz. It launched on the 25th of May, 1973. Also, Pete Conrad retired from NASA in 1973, I might add. But this was a repair mission. The Skylab Space Station had a solar panel missing. It had a lot of the solar shield missing. Its control moment gyros weren't working right because it was underpowered. It had a lot of problems, and they had to go up there and fix that space station. And it had a strap stuck around the remaining solar array so it couldn't deploy. And they had to go cut that strap off to deploy the remaining solar array. One of them stripped off on ascent, and that's when they also lost heat shield. They had to deploy a temporary heat shield, a blanket basically, to protect the Skylab Space Station from the sun. And they did all that as EVA activity. So that was a very busy crew. They went up there and saved a derelict space station and improved the value of man working in orbit, doing things that weren't designed to be done. Something that our robots, even as of today, have not achieve the ability to do, and I'm real skeptical that they will ever achieve the ability to do ad hoc tasks like that, at least entirely autonomously. So we're a long way from that, I do believe. And I can go more into that in the future, why I believe that. However, all that said, Pete Conrad did an amazing job of flying in the Apollo 12 mission and the Skylab II mission. And this would be Skylab. That would be an S4B stage of the Saturn V rocket, outfitted to be a dry workshop. And this shows an astronaut doing an EVA on the Apollo telescope mount. So here's your Apollo telescope mount, sans the solar rays. And here's your docking adapter, which had a lot of scientific equipment in it. Apollo command module, and oxidizer tanks. I'll show a better view of one of these. And now, my friends, we're on board the Skylab Space Station. And this floor pattern was a grid that they had special shoes that could lock into it to hold them in place while they worked. And you can see the locker room, ring where the astronauts were videoed running around inside. The Apollo telescope module was past that ring up there instead of the light you see in them. In any event, Skylab Space Station, that's where they put their waste. That was a wardroom where they ate, and the wardroom window where they could look out and see Earth. That was the shower facility. You would just pull that up. That's highly used, actually. And the exercise trainers, as you can see, this was all training equipment from the actual Saturn Skylab Space Station. This was the actual training equipment used. And you see these lights, these are the kind of lights they had. And by the way, I've got one of these. So there's your lights. This is exactly the kind of lights, except they didn't have LEDs in them, they were fluorescent. Okay, this is an upgraded Skylab, mind you. And you can see again the waffle pattern in the floor here. It repeated itself in many places in the station where they can lock their feet in at various workstations around in here, and lots of internal room. This had the biggest, most voluminous internal space where astronauts could fly of anything flown to date. And Pete Conrad rescued the Skylab Space Station on the Skylab 2 mission. And here is the largest remaining piece of the Skylab Space Station. This is one of those oxidizer tanks you might have seen on what was outside.
Astronaut, but his son did pay about $40 million.
And he hit a beach in Australia.
$30 million to go up on the International Space Station here.
And the U.S. was fined $400.
And you guys are aware that we do
for littering the beach in Australia. And Jimmy Carter wrote him a letter and apologized. Anyway, see the solar cells? That's the solar array. That's what Pete Conrad and crew had to free on the EVA. Oh, the rocket's red glare, clouds bursting in air. No bombs tonight, fortunately. Gay Prue through the night. Where's our flag? It's not flying now, but there's another rocket in the building. To infinity and beyond.